If you are a beginner chess player looking for a simple opening repertoire that doesn't require a ton of study or memorization, I've got just the thing for you. In this video, we're going to be looking at 3 different openings, 1 for the white pieces and 2 for the black pieces, that you can play to get out of the opening alive. They follow opening principles, so they will ultimately help you become a better player and hopefully win some games. Let's get right into it. So first of all, for the white pieces, I recommend the London system. This is an opening I've played pretty much since I started playing chess, once I got through my crazy Gambits phase, and it has served me well all the way up beyond the 2100 chess.com rapid writing, as well as over the board. It is a principled opening, and if you are a beginner, it's going to help you get a solid position and, like I said, get out of the opening alive, which is the whole point. So it starts with your queen's pawn moving forward, and the moves that black plays doesn't really matter. It's a system opening, meaning that you essentially are going to put your pieces on the same squares every single time. There are some exceptions to this. If your opponent is attacking one of your pieces, you need to think about what you need to do to, prevent your piece from being captured. But in general, you're going to move your bishop out to f4. This is kind of the hallmark of the London system. It is slicing through your opponent's position, and it is also helping control the center, putting pawns in the center, putting your minor pieces so that they are helping control the center is something that you want to do in any opening. So let's say black continues developing. We can bring our knight out to f3, always wanting to move all of our minor pieces once before we move any of them twice. And again, moving them towards the center. We really want to have good control over these center squares. I'll delete the extra highlights, but these 4 center squares are where we really want to be. In particular, in the London system, this e5 square is going to be very important when we move into the middle game. We want to plant a knight there eventually, and that knight is usually the one that's going to go there. So let's say black continues development. We're going to start this pawn pyramid on the dark squares. This is another important aspect of the London that we want. It really solidifies our position and makes it pretty difficult for black to break through. Say black continues developing. We're going to put our light squared bishop on this d3 square, aiming out in both directions and controlling these important central light squares. Say black castles. We can continue our development with a move like knight d2. We can also castle in this position. Again, move order doesn't really matter as long as you are following these principles. We can also continue building our pawn pyramid even before we castle, as long as you're not going for the attack before you ultimately get your own king to safety. So after a move like this, let's finally castle. Other moves that you're going to want to play as you move into more of the middle game is moves like h3, because if this knight ever comes after our dark squared bishop, we want to keep that dark squared bishop around. So if possible, we'd like to rock it back all the way to h2, hide it away from that pesky knight, and then we're going to bring our rooks to the center and make one of these pawn breaks in the center as sort of our middle game plan. So that's the basics of the London system. I've got a few other videos on the London if you want to go a little bit more in depth, but now let's flip the board and turn our attention to the black pieces. So with black, you need something that you can play against the 2 center pawn openings, or I should say one that you can play against each of the center pawn openings. So if you get the king's pawn moving forward, my recommendation at the beginner level is the Scandinavian. There are a few reasons for this. First of all, it's most likely going to surprise your opponent. A lot of the time, they're not going to have seen this very much. They're not really going to know what to do. And it's kind of a weird looking move. I mean, you're immediately creating this pawn tension that they are going to have to make a decision about instead of just blitzing out their regular opening moves. So the main thing they do, and the main thing that they should do, is just capture this pawn. Now, we can continue developing our knight. We will get this pawn back eventually. But the most simple way to play this is to capture with the queen. And you might be thinking, okay, I'm a beginner chess player. I've been told not to bring my queen out too early. It's okay. You're going to survive because you're going to know exactly what to do with that queen so that you don't get it trapped. And that's the reason that a lot of times you'll hear don't bring your queen out too early, is because it's at the cost of developing your other pieces, or it is going to be in danger at a certain point after getting kicked around. But white can immediately develop with tempo. That means it's attacking our queen and forcing it to move again. There are a few places that you can put your queen. My favorite spot to put my queen is over here on the side of the board. You can also bring it all the way back. I think there's lines where you can give check or just bring it back here, but this one is kind of the main line. It's a main line, I would say. if you're looking to study this opening, it will have the most resources about this line. And now our development plan is pretty simple. We want to get our other pieces out. We want to eventually push c6 so that if this queen ever gets attacked, we will have an escape square either back to d8 or to c7. And then of course, as always, we want to get our king to safety. So right now, if our opponent continues with developing their knight, we can develop our knight. This pawn, in the best cases, will move forward to d4, and we can now play our pawn to c6. I like playing this move as early as possible because it does just give us that peace of mind that, okay, our queen can get out of there if she needs to. Bishop d3 is a good move. We can move our light squared bishop to a few spots. We don't want to put it on e6 because that's blocking this e-pawn from moving forward, and it's going to take us a while to get better control of the center and also make a path for our dark squared bishops to get out. But a good place for this light squared bishop is just here pinning this knight. Of course, if this knight ever moves, we can take the queen, so usually our opponent is going to want to kick us out. That is the best move. And I will say, backing up just a move or two, you can also play the move bishop to f5 before white has a chance to bring their bishop out to d3. And now, if bishop d3 is played, you can simply capture, trade off, and this is also really strong for both sides. I shouldn't say really strong. It's a pretty equal position for both sides, and you are totally fine with trading off those pieces. And the bishop here on f5 is also doing a good job of controlling some of those center squares, so that might be a good option if you just want to change up the move order a little bit. Here, white can do a few things. Castling is probably the most common, but you also need to be looking out for when this dark squared bishop moves to align with our queen. As soon as this happens, alarm bells need to be going off in your head, because that means that when this knight moves, you can't worry about what the knight is doing. You have to worry about where your queen is going. And a lot of times that can be a blind spot, and that is, again, why you're advised not to bring your queen out too early. But if you know what you're doing, it's going to be okay, I promise. So at this point, you can just move your queen. You can go to queen a6 and just, trade things off here. This is kind of a weird looking line. You can also just continue development with knight bd7, so that when this knight does move, you have a knight here that can recapture after these kinds of trades. So you can just, again, remember, your queen is being attacked. You got to move it. So you can go back to c7, and then if this knight capture happens, well, you've just traded off a bunch of pieces, and you are just very happy. You don't really even have to worry about your queen being attacked because there are just not that many pieces left to do it. So let's say white castles, and now we can move our pawn up to e6, just really having good control of this d5 square so that white will have a harder time pushing this forward and trading it off, because this pawn, it's technically connected to this little pawn island, but it's a little bit of a liability right now because it doesn't have a way to move beyond this center line that a lot of times you need to do if you want to make progress with your pawns in the center of the board. So controlling that square with our own pawns, and then simply we just need to develop our final piece, bring our dark squared bishop out. There's also lines where you can fianchetto this way. It's usually not quite as good for black because white has ways of bringing this bishop down and trading it off, and then you've got these holes in your position, and it's a lot of times just easier to bring it out this way, and then you can castle, and then your development is complete. So that will look something like this. Say this rook comes out, and we can castle, and we have a very strong position here. So Scandinavian defense for the king's pawn opening. Against the queen's pawn, we are going to make things very simple. We played d5 against the king's pawn. We're also just going to play it against the queen's pawn as well. Now, there are a few things that white can do here. They can play the queen's gambit. If you do get this, I would not recommend taking this pawn. The whole point of this is to disrupt our center, and you really have to memorize the different lines that you're going to need to know. They're very sharp and tactical. If you don't know them, you're probably not going to do very well with them because you are breaking your opening principles by giving up your center control. And the whole point of this video is we don't want to memorize a lot. So we're going to look at more system type openings. You can play the queen's gambit declined here. You can also bring your knight out. Move order isn't super important here. We're eventually going to develop our knight anyway. And after all of this development is said and done, and this move happens, we are just very happy to continue with putting our bishop in the center, kind of like in the London, looking up at both of these different directions. If this pawn ever moves forward, we simply drop it back. We want to be looking over at the king's side because that's probably where white is going to castle, and then we are also going to castle ourselves. Now, one important thing to note, going back to, say, this position, if white ever captures this center pawn, I would recommend to capture back with the E pawn, and a lot of times you hear you want to capture with your pawns towards the center. This is usually meant more for the pawns like on the outside of the board, capturing towards the center there, because usually it opens up for your rooks. But when you're talking about the pawns that are really close to the center, the reason that you want to capture with the E pawn to complete your pawn chain is that that is going to free your light squared bishop, because otherwise it's going to be stuck there for a while behind this wall of pawns. Eventually, what you want to do as your middle game plan is push forward with either e5 or c5 so that you are making a path for that light squared bishop to come out. Like in the Scandinavian, where your queen was kind of the problem that you needed to solve, your light squared bishop in this case is going to be the problem that you need to solve, how to free it, how to develop it, and get it on the best score possible. So going back, there are other second moves that white can play. Another very common one is the London system, which we looked at with the white pieces. We are going to do some very similar developments. We can bring our knight out, say this move, we can play here, here, and we can bring this dark squared bishop out. So our plan with the London system, when this bishop comes out to f4, is we want to trade off our dark squared bishop for their strong dark squared bishop, because if you are a London system player, you will know that this is a very strong piece, just like we talked about. So if we can get rid of it, that will help us out a lot. White will continue to develop. We want to get our king to safety, of course. And as white continues development, you can play the move c5. This is something that I would recommend, but if you want to keep it very simple, you can also just play c6. You want to make sure that you bring your queen up before you develop your knight out to d7, because otherwise you are blocking your queen's protection of that bishop. So say if white castles, this would be something you don't want to do, because then your bishop will get captured. So that is a quick queen move that you need to make, then continuing development. And again, you want to push one of these pawns forward at some point, whether you do it sooner or later, and also make sure you're counting, because there's a lot of white pieces that are looking at this e5 square. This is a place where you can kind of play around with the move order, see what works, see what doesn't work for you, but the basics still stand that you just want to create a very strong, solid position in the center, develop your pieces, get your king to safety, and then push forward in the middle game. So those are my recommendations for a beginner repertoire. Obviously, as you continue to improve, you can expand on these openings. You can also learn different ones, play around with them, see what works best for you. But this, I think, is just a good place to start if you are questioning exactly where you want to put your pieces to survive that opening phase of the game. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out a lot. I'll see you soon.